The first thing Min-hyuk noticed when he walked into his own penthouse was the silence. Not the usual silence of a space waiting to be filled. This was the silence of a room that had already accepted it would stay empty. The kind of silence that settles into walls and corners and doesn't move. He stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds. That was how long it took for his brain to register what his body already knew. Her shoes were gone from the rack by the entrance. The small bamboo plant she'd bought from a street vendor in Insadong, the one she'd named Gerald, for reasons she refused to explain, sat dry and leaning in its pot on the ledge below the window, like it had already given up waiting for her too. Min-hyuk set down his bag. He walked to the bedroom. The closet door was open. The left side, her side, was empty. Not emptied in a rush, not ransacked. Just clean. Like she had taken her time, folded everything neatly, and decided he was no longer worth staying for. He didn't move for a long time. Behind him, Lee Jun-ho appeared in the doorway. His expression was already arranged into something that looked like sympathy. If Min-hyuk had been watching closely, he might have noticed that Jun-ho's eyes didn't move the way a grieving man's eyes do. They were still, calculating, waiting. "I'm sorry, Hyung," Jun-ho said quietly. "I didn't want to be the one to show you." He set a tablet on the bed. Security footage. Timestamp: 14:32. 3 days ago. Maya in the lobby, wheeling a suitcase toward the exit. Walking steadily, not looking back. Not hesitating. Then the second file. Wire transfers. A foreign account. Numbers that would have taken serious connections to access. Min-hyuk stared at the screen for a very long time. Where did this money come from? His voice was flat. Empty. "The money came from a rival gang, the Shim faction," Jun-ho said. He paused. "She had been passing them information about your operations for a while. One of the things she gave them was the details of your Japan trip, your route, your schedule, everything. That is how they knew exactly where you would be while you were away." The silence that followed was the kind that comes before something breaks. Min-hyuk closed the tablet. He set it down gently. He turned toward the window. His hands were very still at his sides. Whatever was moving behind his eyes had nothing to do with anger. It looked a lot more like a man who had just understood, for the first time in his life, that he had trusted someone completely and been completely wrong. "Get out," he said. Jun-ho left without a word. Min-hyuk stayed at the window until the city lights blurred. In his jacket pocket, still wrapped in black velvet, was a ring he had carried across an ocean. He had bought it on his last night in Tokyo, slipping away from his men to a quiet little jewelry shop tucked down a narrow side street. Not from anyone on his payroll. Not from anyone who owed him a favor. He had gone alone, in ordinary clothes, and stood in that small bright room and picked out something he thought she would love. A pearl set in gold, because she once told him she didn't trust diamonds. Too flashy, she'd said. Too busy trying to prove something. He had planned to be on one knee by morning. Now he stood with the ring still in his pocket, and the closet behind him empty, and the bamboo plant dying slowly in the fading light. He almost left the ring on the ledge below, next to Gerald. But at the last second, he picked it back up, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and walked out. 6 months later, the man who returned to the streets of Seoul barely resembled the one who had left. Min-hyuk had always been feared. That was simply the physics of who he was, the Kong name, the breadth of his network, the particular way he looked at people when they disappointed him. Fear came naturally, the way shadow follows a certain kind of light. But the Min-hyuk who emerged from those 6 months was something different. The fear he inspired before had a shape to it, a logic. There were rules. There were lines he didn't cross. There was, beneath everything, a man who could love something. That man was no longer visible. What his lieutenants saw in meetings was a version of Min-hyuk that operated entirely without warmth. He expanded territory through confrontation rather than strategy. He made decisions that made even his most brutal enforcers uncomfortable. He stopped sleeping in the penthouse. He stopped answering personal calls. He cut off everyone who wasn't operationally useful. He ate exactly enough to function. He moved through Seoul like a man who had already decided there was nothing in it worth protecting. No one spoke of her, nor did anyone dare mention her name in the syndicate. Not because Min-hyuk had told them not to, because they had seen his face the day he came home, and they were not stupid. The Golden Fangs started moving into the district markets in late October. They started small, showing up at vendor stalls and demanding money, causing trouble, threatening people who refused to cooperate. It was the way gangs always moved when they wanted to take over a new area without drawing immediate attention. Then, 3 weeks in, they escalated. Market stalls vandalized. Vendors threatened. A fish seller's cart was shoved over and sent crashing to the ground in the middle of a Tuesday morning. Word came up through the networks that the Fangs were testing the Kong Syndicate's response time, probing for softness. They found none. Min-hyuk authorized a full enforcement sweep of the district, and this time he made clear he would be handling it himself. No middlemen, no delegation. He wanted to watch it happen with his own eyes. Meanwhile, in the poorest district of eastern Seoul, in a building so old its stairwell rattled when buses passed, a woman in a rooftop room was pressing her back against the wall and breathing through a contraction. Not labor. Not yet. A warning. Her body's way of saying, "You are doing too much." Maya Jordan lowered herself onto the edge of the cot and waited for it to pass. The room was small enough that she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms out. One window. One bare bulb. A portable heater that worked on the third try if you hit it twice on the left side. She had found this room through a woman named Mrs. O, who ran the ground floor convenience store and asked no questions about the foreign girl with the oversized sweater and the careful eyes that were always doing math about something. Maya was 7 months pregnant. She was pregnant, and she had spent almost every one of those months in hiding right here in Seoul. She had not called her mother back in Atlanta, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how to explain it yet. How do you call your mother and say, "The man I loved had a family that decided I didn't count as a person"? How do you say, "I found out I was pregnant the same morning I found out I had no passport, no money, and no one in an entire country who would help me"? You don't. You hold your belly on a creaking cot and you whisper to your baby in the dark, and you make a promise. "We're going to be okay," she said softly, her hand pressed flat against her stomach. "I know it doesn't look like it right now, but we are. You're going to grow up in Atlanta and eat your grandma's cooking, and I am going to make sure you never know what cold feels like." The baby shifted. Maya exhaled. She had an early morning shift at the seafood market. She needed to leave while the streets were still dark. Her back would ache from standing. She would do it anyway, same as she'd done it every day for 6 months, because the alternative was collapsing, and collapsing was the one thing she couldn't afford. She had also been taking small design jobs on the side, using a fake name so no one could trace the work back to her. 3 projects, all delivered digitally, all paid in cash transfers she picked up from a wire service 2 neighborhoods over. It wasn't enough. It was barely anything. But it was hers, which was more than Madame Hong had been able to take from her. The contraction eased. Maya closed her eyes. She let herself remember, just for a second, because she had learned that the only way to stop the memories from ambushing her in the middle of the night was to allow them briefly, on her own terms. She let herself remember the way he used to say her name. Not Maya. The way most people said it, 2 flat syllables, but something that had weight to it. Something that sounded like it meant more than just her name. She let herself remember the night he spread out an entire map of the U.S. on the kitchen floor at 2 in the morning and asked her to show him Atlanta, because he said he needed to understand where she came from before he could understand her. She remembered how he'd looked at the spot she pointed to, like it was a place he already planned to love. She opened her eyes. The bare bulb hummed. She put that memory away and got up to start her shift. She didn't know that across the city, in a convoy of black SUVs moving through the dark toward the district market, Kong Min-hyuk was already on his way, and that by the time the first light touched the market stalls, he would be standing right in front of her. She didn't know that Jun-ho, sitting in the second vehicle, watching the approach on a tablet, had just received a message that stopped his breath. Short, urgent, and damning. The American girl, the one they had spent 6 months making disappear, had just been spotted at the exact market Min-hyuk was heading to. Jun-ho read it twice. His jaw tightened. She didn't know that the reason her baby had shifted at that exact moment, restless and alive in the dark of that rooftop room, was perhaps the most accurate thing she'd felt in months. Something was coming. Before we continue, if you've ever believed a lie about someone you loved, and only found out the truth when it was almost too late, this story is for you. Subscribe to A Frock Shadow Stories. The next scene will change everything. The market came alive in the worst way when the black SUVs arrived. Vendors who had been selling dried squid and bundled scallions and towers of persimmons at 7 in the morning suddenly went still the way small animals go still when they sense something enormous moving nearby. Word traveled through the market the way it always does. Not shouted, not announced, just a ripple moving from stall to stall. A hand gesture here, a lowered voice there. Kong men, don't look. Keep moving. Don't look. Most of the market complied. The golden fangs did not. There were 12 of them spread through the market, identifiable by the thin gold chain each one wore at the wrist. A stupid, theatrical gesture that Min-hyuk noted with the particular contempt he reserved for people who wanted to be feared but didn't understand how fear actually worked. Real fear didn't wear a chain. Real fear wore a suit and showed up before you expected it. His men fanned out with the practiced efficiency of a unit that had done this too many times to be theatrical about it. Min-hyuk walked through the center of the market alone. Not because he needed to, but because walking through chaos alone was a statement, and statements made to gangs needed to be physical. The first confrontation happened at the far end of the fish stalls. He heard it before he saw it. Something heavy crashing against wood, then a woman's sharp cry, then the clatter of metal hitting the wet ground. He turned the corner and the scene in front of him was already ugly. One of the Fong men had his arm slammed down across a vendor's stall. Crates knocked to the ground. Fish scattered across the wet floor. An elderly woman was on her knees trying to gather what she could save. And standing between her and the thug, standing between the Fong man and the fallen vendor, both hands braced against a wooden crate, was a woman in an oversized padded jacket. A visibly pregnant woman. She had put her body between the thug and the elderly vendor on the ground, which was either the bravest thing Min-hyuk had seen in 6 months or the most reckless, and the way she was looking at the Fong man. Not with fear, with the specific controlled fury of someone who has already decided what they're willing to do. Made him stop walking. Get away from her, she said. Her Korean was accented but clear. She's 60 years old and you just knocked her off her feet. Back off. The Fong man laughed. He said something dismissive and reached forward to shove the woman aside. She didn't go far enough. He grabbed the front of her jacket and swung her into the wooden crate. The sound she made when she hit it, not a scream, just a sharp, involuntary exhale of pain, landed on Min-hyuk like a physical thing. His enforcer park was already moving. 2 of the Fong man's teeth were on the market floor before he finished his second sentence. Min-hyuk walked forward steadily, and the remaining Fong men in the vicinity began calculating exits. He stood next to the woman who had fallen. She was already pulling herself upright. One hand on the crate for leverage, the other pressed flat against her stomach. Her face was turned down, hair falling forward. She was breathing through something, pain probably, maybe just the shock of the impact. He extended a hand out of reflex, the automatic gesture of someone raised to be functional in a crisis. Are you? She pushed her hair back and looked up. The market ceased to exist. The noise, the vendors, the sound of his men dealing with the fangs 20 meters away, Junho's voice somewhere behind him issuing instructions. All of it dropped out. All of it fell into the same silence as an empty penthouse closet and a dying bamboo plant and a ring he'd carry around in his suit pockets for 6 months. Because the woman looking up at him from the fish market floor, visibly and heavily pregnant, with a bruise already forming along her cheekbone and a fury in her eyes that had not diminished even slightly in 6 months, was Maya. Min-hyuk's hand was still extended between them. He did not move it. He could not move anything. His entire nervous system had apparently decided that this moment required a full system pause before any further action couldn't be authorized. Maya's eyes found his face and for 1 second, one single helpless second, the fury dropped. Something raw and real and completely unguarded crossed her face. The expression of a person seeing something they had trained themselves to stop expecting. Then it closed again. She ignored his hand, gripped the crate herself, and stood. They were the same height when she stood. She had always been exactly the right height to look at him directly, which she had once told him was clearly by design because the universe knew she was going to need to maintain eye contact with him on a regular basis. She was not smiling now. Maya. His voice came out wrong. Low and fractured in a way he would have never allowed in front of anyone. Don't. She stepped back. Her hand went to her stomach again. Protective, automatic. Don't say my name like that. How long have you been here? Not a question. An accounting. That's what you want to know? Her voice was steady but her jaw was tight. Not if I'm okay. Not how this happened. How long? Maya. 6 months. She said it like she was reading a number off a page. I've been in this district for 6 months. In a rooftop room. Working in this market. She gestured once, a short, sharp movement. Because your mother took my passport and froze my accounts and made it very clear that a black woman had no place in the Kong family. So when I found out I was pregnant, I made sure she would never find out. I hid. Because I would rather raise our son alone than let your world decide his worth before he even takes his first breath. The market sounds came back slowly, like someone turning up a dial. Min Hyuk looked at her stomach. He could not seem to stop looking at it, the way a person looks at something they're still trying to make their brain accept as real. Whose? Don't. The word was quiet but absolute. Don't you dare finish that sentence. He didn't. She looked at him the way you look at someone you have spent 6 months trying to stop loving and have not succeeded. It was not a kind look. It was not a forgiving one. But it was honest in a way that nothing in the past 6 months had been. He's yours, Min Hyuk. Her voice dropped. Not softer, more precise. Like she was making sure every word landed exactly where she was aiming it. But your mother made it very clear that a black child had no place in the pristine Kong family legacy. So I made sure he'd never have to find that out for himself. I would rather raise our son alone in a building with no heat than let your world touch him. The silence between them was the most honest thing Min Hyuk had experienced since he came back from Japan. Then, through his earpiece, his tech enforcer Ryu's voice came through low and urgent. Boss, listen to this. I just intercepted a live call between Junho and the Golden Fangs. Then through the noise, a voice came through that Min Hyuk recognized immediately. Junho. Calm, deliberate, speaking to someone on the other end. She is here at the market and the boss has already seen her. Do not let her leave. If she walks out of that market alive, we are all dead. Finish it now. Min Hyuk went very still. In the 6 months of grief and fury and controlled violence, something inside him had hardened completely. Like a wound that never healed properly and turned into a scar tissue instead. A wall. The kind you build when you decide that love was a vulnerability and you are finished with being vulnerable. In the space of 30 seconds, that wall came down. Not slowly. All at once, the way walls do when the lie holding them up is removed. He turned. Junho was 15 meters away, still on his phone, still watching the market perimeter with the expression of a man managing a complicated situation. He had not yet processed that the transmission had been intercepted. He had not yet seen the way Min Hyuk was looking at him. When Junho's eyes finally found Min Hyuk's, the phone went slowly to his side. Hyung, get her out, Min Hyuk said quietly to Ryu, who had appeared by his side even before he was done delivering the message, without turning to face him. Right now. Secondary vehicle. Go. Then he walked toward Junho. The market parted around him the way water parts around something that is moving with absolute certainty about where it is going. Maya watched him walk away. She felt Ryu at her elbow, firm and urgent, steering her toward a side exit. She went because she had no choice and because some part of her recognized that whatever was about to happen needed to happen without her in the middle of it. But she watched until the crowd closed between them. And she noticed something she would think about later, when she was alone and finally had the space to process it. From the moment he reached her, he had not once taken his eyes off her. Not to manage the chaos around them, not to direct his men, not even to assess the threat closing in. He had looked at her the way a man looks at the thing he almost lost before he even knew he was losing it. She pressed her back against the vehicle seat. The baby moved. I know, she whispered. I know. Junho ran. This was the worst decision he could have made, and some part of him knew it even as his legs were already moving because no one runs from Kong Min Hyuk. There is no escaping him. There is only the short, foolish distance between the moment you try and the moment he finds you. But panic is not logical, and Lee Junho, who had spent 3 years calculating every angle and managing every outcome, had finally encountered the one variable he hadn't accounted for. He had underestimated how much Min Hyuk loved her. He made it to the alley behind the market before Min Hyuk caught him. One hand came down on his collar, and before Junho could react, the side of his face met the wall of the fish warehouse. Min Hyuk's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was never loud when it mattered. It was quieter than the rain beginning to fall on the alley's wet stones. And that was how Junho knew that this conversation was already over. The footage, Min-hyuk said. Junho said nothing. The wire transfers. Still nothing. Min-hyuk's hand pressed once. A single precise pressure point, and Junho made a sound that he would never admit to making. Whose idea was it? Yours or my mother's? Junho's breathing was ragged. Rain collected in the gap between his collar and his neck. The alley smelled like brine and concrete. He thought about lying. He looked at Min-hyuk's face and reconsidered. Your mother, he said finally. She came to me before you left for Japan. Before any of this started. She said Maya was a liability. A foreign woman with no family connections, no standing. She said if you stayed with her, you'd make yourself vulnerable. That the family needed you to make a different choice. And you agreed. I agreed that the family needed to be protected. You agreed, Min-hyuk said over him very quietly. To destroy a woman who had done nothing. You agreed to leave her with nothing in a country that wasn't hers. You agreed to let me believe. His jaw tightened. You let me spend 6 months believing she used me. Junho didn't answer. The fangs. Was that also agreed? A beat too long. She was going to be a problem. Something shifted in Min-hyuk's expression that Junho had never seen there before. It was not rage. Rage had a heat to it and energy. This was the opposite. Something that had gone entirely cold and entirely clear, like water that has finally stopped moving. She was pregnant, Min-hyuk said. His voice dropped to something very quiet. You sent men to a market to kill a pregnant woman. Junho opened his mouth. Don't. Min-hyuk released him. He stepped back. He looked at Junho the way you look at a person you are deciding how to remember. You spent 3 years as my right hand. 3 years I trusted you with things I trusted no one else with. I would have walked into fire with you. Junho had the grace to look ashamed. Or something close to it. I protected the family. You protected a version of this family that never included the people who mattered. Min-hyuk straightened his jacket. The Fong affiliation, I'll deal with that through the network. Don't come back to the syndicate. Don't come back to this district. Don't contact anyone on my payroll. He turned. If I see you again, we won't have a conversation. He walked out of the alley into the rain. Junho stood against the warehouse wall, breathing, watching him go. There were probably other things he should have done in that moment. There were no good options left. He had spent 6 months holding the shape of a lie, and the lie had finally collapsed, and the only thing left was the inventory of what it had cost. He didn't follow. Maya was in the secondary vehicle when Min-hyuk found her. The car had parked 3 blocks from the market, off a side street. Ryu stood outside in the rain, giving her space with the instinctive discretion of a man who has been around powerful people long enough to understand that certain moments don't need witnesses. Min-hyuk knocked once on the window. Maya looked up. Something moved across her face. She reached forward and unlocked the door. He got in. The vehicle was warm. She had someone's jacket across her lap. Not hers. Something one of the enforcers had passed back. She looked exhausted in the particular way of someone who has been holding themselves together through will alone for a very long time and is now sitting in the first quiet moment they've had in months. Neither of them spoke immediately. How far are you? He said finally. 7 months. She didn't look at him. Have you had prenatal care? A short pause. Some. There's a community clinic 2 neighborhoods over. I've gone when I could afford the visit. Those 4 words landed quietly and sat there. When I could afford it. He turned them over slowly, trying to build a picture of what 6 months of that kind of survival had actually looked like day to day, and finding that the picture was worse every time he tried. Where are you staying? Rooftop room. Building on Geiwa-ro. She paused. It has a heater. Mostly. He looked at her profile. The bruise on her cheek had deepened. Her hands in her lap were very still. Her jaw had that particular set to it. Not closed off, not angry, just braced. Like a person who has learned to expect that things are going to be hard and has made their peace with it. He had loved that jaw set. He had told her once that she carried herself like a person who had decided that no amount of difficulty was going to make her less than herself. She'd rolled her eyes. She'd also, later, when she thought he was asleep, repeated it quietly to herself in the mirror. He knew because he hadn't been asleep. I need to tell you something. he said. She turned to look at him. Everything Junho showed me, the footage, the transfers, it was fabricated. My mother had him do it. He held her gaze. I came home with a ring. I was going to ask you that morning to marry me. When I found the closet empty, he stopped. He started again. I believed it because I needed an explanation that was simpler than the truth. And the truth would have required me to suspect my family, and I wasn't ready to do that. Maya was quiet for a moment. She took my passport, she said. I woke up the morning after you left. She was already at the door with two men I'd never seen. She sat across from me in your penthouse, and she said, Maya's voice was steady, but her hands in her lap gripped each other. She said I was a mistake you'd eventually recognize. She said a woman like me had no place in the Kong family. She said I had two choices, disappear or be made to disappear. Rain fell steadily against the windshield. Min-hyuk's hands rested on his knees, perfectly still, while something went through him that he didn't have a word for. It was past anger. It was past grief. It lived in the space that opens up when you fully comprehend the scale of what someone you should have protected has been put through, and you understand that your absence was part of what made it possible. I found out I was pregnant that same morning, Maya said. After she left, I sat there in your penthouse with no passport, no money, and a test in my hand, and I thought about calling you. But I was afraid your mother was still having me watched. I was afraid she'd find me before you ever got the message. I had $300 in a coat pocket. I picked up my bag and I walked out, and I didn't stop. She looked down at her stomach. I kept telling myself you'd come, that you'd find out and you'd come. She said it the way you say something you're no longer embarrassed about believing, because the embarrassment has burned off and what's left is just the fact of it. I stopped telling myself that around month 4. I should have come. Yes. Not, it's okay. Not, you didn't know. Just yes. An honest accounting, offered without softening, which was precisely the kind of honesty that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. He reached into his jacket. He set the black velvet box on the console between them. Maya looked at it. She didn't touch it. I'm not asking, he said. Not now. I don't have the right to ask anything of you right now. I just need you to know it was always real. That I was always, he stopped. That ring has been in my jacket pocket every single day for the past 6 months, because I couldn't figure out what else to do with it. Maya looked at the box for a long time. I named the baby Gerald, she said finally. A silence. After the plant? After the plant. I thought if I gave him the worst name possible to carry for a few months, then when I finally told him his real name in Atlanta, he'd feel like he got the better deal. Min-hyuk looked at her, and then, for the first time in 6 months, something in his face that he had kept closed off and cold for so long simply broke open. He laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a controlled one. A real one, low and sudden, the kind that comes from somewhere you weren't expecting it to come from. Maya watched it happen. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in this car. She had made that decision 4 seconds ago, and she intended to honor it. She reached out and put her hand over his. Just for a moment. Just enough to mean something. Gerald is not his name, she said. No, he agreed. Absolutely not. The rain fell steadily outside. Neither of them moved. But for the first time in 6 months, the silence between them wasn't built on a lie. It was a quiet morning at the Kong family estate. Madame Hong had guests arriving later that day, and the house had been prepared since early that morning. Fresh orchids on the entrance table, the tea service carefully arranged in the sitting room. The staff moved quietly and efficiently. The way people do when they know mistakes in this house are never overlooked. To Madame Hong, a perfectly composed home was its own kind of power, and she maintained that composure the way other people maintained an army. She was sitting with her second cup of tea when she heard the front door open. She heard the footsteps, one set no two, and the particular weight and rhythm of Min-hyuk's stride, which she had known since he was 8 years old, told her immediately that he was not here for a reconciliation. He appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. He had come straight from the market without stopping to change. His jacket was still damp from the rain, and there was a dark stain along the side of his shirt that Madame Hong noticed immediately but had the composure not to stare at. He had the particular stillness of someone who had already decided, before walking in, exactly how this conversation was going to end and has made their peace with it. Beside him, slightly behind, was Maya. Madame Hong looked at her the same way she had 6 months ago. The same cold, measuring stare, the same careful mask of composure. But this time, something underneath that mask shifted. Her eyes moved, just for a second, to Maya's stomach. And for the first time, the mask slipped. She had not expected Maya to walk in like this. Pregnant, bruised, and completely unbroken. Min Hyuk. Her voice was precisely warm. This is unexpected. Sit down, he said. It was not a request. She sat because she recognized the tone, and because standing when someone who holds your financial documents is speaking creates an unfavorable optics. Min Hyuk did not sit. He stood in the center of the room in the way he stood at the center of any space he intended to own, and looked at his mother with 6 months of evidence rearranging itself behind his eyes into the precise shape of what she had done. You took her passport, he said. Madame Hong's composure did not break. I protected this family. You took her passport. You froze her accounts. And you threatened her in her own home, in our home, because she is black, and to you that was reason enough to destroy her life. He spoke without raising his voice, which was somehow more absolute than shouting. You left her in a foreign country with $300 and nothing else. And then you let me believe she abandoned me, because the truth was something you couldn't bring yourself to say. I told you the truth about what she was. What she was. He looked at his mother as if he was seeing something for the first time and not enjoying the view. She is the mother of my son. She is the only person in the last 6 years of this life who looked at me and saw something worth staying for. And you decided, because of where she's from and what she looks like, that she was a correction to be made. Madame Hong's hands tightened on her knees. She is not Korean. She has no family here. No standing, nothing that belongs in. She has more standing than anyone in this room, Maya said. Both of them looked at her. She had not planned to speak. She had decided in the car that she would let Min Hyuk handle this, that she had already spent enough of herself surviving this family's decisions about her life, and she didn't owe them anything more. But Madame Hong was looking at her now with that same measuring expression from 6 months ago, the one that had already decided, before Maya ever said a word, that she didn't belong. And Maya found that she still had something to say. She stepped forward. You came into my home, Maya said. You sat across from me while I was alone and frightened, and you looked at me. Not because of anything I had done, but because of where I was born and what I look like. And you decided I didn't belong in this family. That was the whole reason. That was all it ever was. Her voice was calm. She had promised herself calm. You didn't even know I was pregnant that day. There was no child yet for you to object to. You just knew I was black. And that was enough for you to destroy my entire life. She paused. When she spoke again, something in her voice had changed. Not fear, but the weight of what she was about to say. And now look at me. Look at what you tried to erase. My son is alive. He is healthy. And someday he is going to know exactly what his grandmother thought people like him deserved. Madame Hong said nothing. Maya kept going. You'll say this was about protecting the family. But a family that tears apart the people who actually love it isn't a family. It's a performance. You were protecting a picture. Something with your name on it, looking exactly the way you wanted it to look. And you were willing to throw away real people just to keep that picture clean. The orchids were still sitting on the entrance table. The tea service was still arranged on the credenza. The staff moved quietly around them, careful and almost invisible, the way they always were in this house. Madame Hong looked at her, and for the first time her composure cracked completely. Whatever she was feeling, looking at the pregnancy, the bruise on Maya's cheek, the 6 months written across her face, was something she could no longer arrange into anything easier to look at. She had spent her whole life believing that control was the same as love. Now, in her own sitting room, she was being forced to see that they had never been the same thing at all. She did not apologize. Min Hyuk had not expected her to. He sat down across from his mother and opened the file on his phone. The Kong family estate is in my name, he said. It has been since my father's death. You have been the managing resident, which is a courtesy, not a right. He set the phone on the table between them. Every subsidiary account you've operated under the family banner, the offshore ones, the charitable fronts, the 2 properties in Jeju, they're being reviewed. Ryu started this morning. Madam Hong looked at the phone. There was nothing left to arrange now. Min Hyuk. You made a choice 6 months ago, he said. You made it without telling me. You made it because you decided your judgment about the people in my life was more important than my own. I am making a choice now, and I'm telling you directly. He picked up the phone. You're done managing this family's affairs. The estate accounts are frozen pending legal review. The staff will receive reassignment notifications today. You'll have access to a monthly stipend, enough to live without difficulty, not enough to interfere. This is because of her, Madam Hong said, her voice for the first time genuinely unsteady. You are dismantling 30 years of this family's. This is because of you, Min Hyuk said, not loudly, flatly, like a door closing. Everything you built in this family, you built on my father's loyalty and my own. You spent that loyalty making a decision you had no right to make. The consequence of that decision is this conversation. He stood up. The conversation was over. Maya was already at the door. He walked toward her and then, at the threshold, stopped once. As for the offshore accounts, he said without turning around, the authorities will have all the documentation within the next 2 weeks. This isn't a warning, Mother. It's already done. A warning gives someone a chance to change something. This doesn't. He left. Madam Hong remained seated in the sitting room for a long time after they left. She looked at the orchids on the table, the tea service laid out so carefully that morning. Everything around her represented a version of family she had spent her whole life protecting, and in a single conversation all of it had collapsed. She reached for her cup. It was cold. Outside, Min Hyuk walked beside Maya through the estate's front courtyard toward the waiting vehicle. The rain had slowed to a fine mist. The gardens were immaculate, the way they had always been, the way they would be maintained until the legal review was complete and the staff relocated and the estate absorbed back into the corporate structure where it would become simply a building rather than the monument to an idea it had been used as. Maya walked with both hands clasped in front of her, moving carefully on the wet stones. You okay? He asked. I said everything I needed to say. She glanced at him. Are you? He thought about it honestly, which was something he had not done in months. The practice of asking himself a question and waiting for the real answer rather than the functional one. Not yet, he said. But I think I will be. She nodded like that was the correct answer. The vehicle doors opened. Min Hyuk moved to help her in. A careful hand at her back, nothing assuming, just present. And Maya let him, which was its own kind of statement. In the car, she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. My mother is going to lose her mind when she finds out, Maya said. About which part? Pick one. Maya kept her eyes closed. She's going to love you, for the record. She's going to be insufferable about it. She's going to say something like, I told you not to move to Korea. And then feed you for 4 days and refuse to let you leave. He was quiet for a moment. I can handle that, he said. Maya opened one eye. You sure? She makes you eat even when you're full. I've been running a criminal syndicate for 6 years. I can handle a mother in Atlanta. Famous last words. Maya closed her eyes again, but the corner of her mouth lifted, just slightly. Outside the window, the city lights blurred past in the rain. Somewhere in the eastern district, the rooftop room sat empty now, the heater, the bare bulb, the small cot. All of it already felt like the past. This isn't over yet. The most dangerous moment is still coming. Subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The legal review took 11 days. Min Hyuk brought Maya to the penthouse that same day, the day they confronted Madam Hong. She accepted the guest suite, but only under protest, and spent the next few days insisting she could manage on her own and didn't need anyone looking after her. That argument fell apart on day 3, when she fainted briefly in the kitchen while making tea. She did not tell him about the fainting. He found out from Ryu, who had quietly been assigned to keep an eye on the penthouse floor. Ryu delivered the news carefully, clearly trying hard not to have an opinion about it. Min Hyuk found Maya in the sitting room after that, reading on her phone, feet tucked under her, looking entirely too composed for someone who had hit the floor that morning. Ryu told you, she said without looking up. He mentioned it. I was fine. You fainted. Briefly. He sat down across from her. He had learned, in the short time since he'd brought her here, that Maya operated on a specific principle. She would accept help exactly as far as she had decided help was warranted, and no further, and trying to push past that boundary resulted in a particular kind of silence that was considerably worse than the verbal pushback. She was not a woman who wanted to be managed. She was a woman who wanted to be respected enough to be asked. So he asked, "What do you actually need right now?" She looked up from her phone. "Prenatal appointment," she said. "A good one. The community clinic was fine, but I haven't had a full scan since month 5. I'll have someone arrange it today. I want to pick the doctor. I'll send you 3 options." She considered. "That's acceptable. Anything else?" She looked at him for a moment. The particular look she had given him several times since he'd brought her here, which he had come to understand was the look of a woman calibrating how much to trust what she was seeing. It was not a dismissive look. It was an honest one. She was checking the data. "I want to call my mother," she said. "Of course. She's going to be on a plane within 48 hours of that phone call. I'll have the guest room prepared. She'll take over your kitchen. She's welcome to it." Maya looked at him for another moment. Then she uncurled from the sofa and stood, one hand briefly on his shoulder as she passed. A small, private gesture, the kind that doesn't announce itself, and went into her room. Min-hyuk sat in the sitting room for a moment after she left. He thought about the ring still in the velvet box on the console in the car. He thought about the question he had not asked and the one he intended to ask eventually, when he had done enough to earn the right. He thought about what it meant to earn something from a person you had failed to protect, and whether earning was even the right word, or whether the correct word was something closer to demonstrate, the daily, unremarkable act of being present and reliable and real over a long enough period that trust could build itself back up from the foundation rather than being declared. He thought, "I have time." He thought, "I will use it correctly." The legal review concluded on day 11 with Madame Hong's offshore accounts frozen and a formal report filed with the appropriate financial authority. Min-hyuk delivered it personally. Not through counsel, not through intermediary. He sat across from a government official he had never met and placed documentation on a table and said, "This is what happened. This is the evidence. This is the account of a person who used family authority to commit financial fraud and threaten an innocent woman." He answered every question that was asked of him. He did not make deals. He did not invoke the family name as a mitigating factor. Madame Hong was detained 3 days later. The news moved through the networks the way such things always do, quickly, with significant embellishment, and in this case with an undercurrent of shock because Madame Hong had spent 30 years being untouchable, and nothing changes a city's understanding of power faster than watching the untouchable be touched. Min-hyuk did not watch it on the news. He was in the prenatal appointment room when it happened, sitting in a plastic chair beside Maya while a sonographer moved a transducer across her stomach and showed them a black and white image on a screen. "He's healthy," the doctor said. "All measurements normal. He's in good position." She smiled. "Do you want to hear the heartbeat?" Maya looked at the screen. The sound filled the small room. Steady, rapid, undeniable. The heartbeat of a person who had not been named yet and had already survived more than most people do in a lifetime. Who had spent 6 months in a cold rooftop room being whispered to in the dark by a woman who never stopped promising him that things would get better. Min-hyuk sat very still. He had processed a great deal in the past 2 weeks. The reality of Junho's betrayal. His mother's detention. The restructuring of the syndicate's senior operations. The separation of legitimate holdings from the elements he was in the process of dissolving. The careful management of an organization that would take months to fully legitimize. These were large, complicated things, and he had handled them the way he handled large, complicated things, which was methodically and without obvious feeling. This was not large or complicated. This was a heartbeat. It lasted a few seconds. It sounded like something that had always been there, waiting. Maya was looking at the screen with an expression that was entirely open, no armor, no measurement, no assessment. Just her looking at her son. Min-hyuk looked at her looking at him. He made a decision. Not about a ring or an apartment or a country or a future. He made a decision that was smaller and more fundamental than any of those. He decided that whatever he had to do to remain in this room, in this life next to this woman and their son, he would do it. Without condition. Without the version of himself that had learned to protect what he loved by holding it at a distance. He reached over and took her hand. Maya turned to look at him. She did not take her hand away. "Hey!" she said quietly, "the way you speak in a room that has just become sacred." "Hey!" he said. The The heartbeat continued. Outside the clinic, the city moved on the way it always did, completely unaware of what had just happened inside. Madame Hong, meanwhile, was still being processed by the authorities. The same arrest from a few days earlier, now slowly working its way through the system. Junho was, by now, already gone from every sphere Min-hyuk operated in. The syndicate's books were with auditors. And over those 11 days, the penthouse had quietly become something different. It used to be the place he went to avoid feeling anything. Now it felt like somewhere he actually wanted to be. But none of that mattered right now. Not compared to what was happening inside this room. What mattered most was simple. A heartbeat, 2 people, and a hand that had been held without needing to be asked. Something had been stolen. Something was being returned. The math was not clean. There was no calculation that made 6 months in a cold room equivalent to anything. There was no accounting that gave back the first ultrasound, the first kicks, the nights Maya had spent alone promising a child that things would get better. Those were gone. They did not come back. And here is what did come back. Morning light in the penthouse kitchen. The smell of good coffee. The sound of Maya on the phone with her mother, saying, "Mama, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down first." And the quiet of an apartment in the early hours, where Min-hyuk, Maya, and their unborn son were finally under the same roof, together, for the first time. What came back instead was something new. Not the same as before. Too much had happened for things to simply return to how they were. But rebuilt. Something that had been tested, had survived, and now knew exactly what it was made of. Something that has been through the fire and still has a heartbeat. On a morning in late spring, with the kind of light that comes through windows and reminds you that most of the world is not a problem, Min-hyuk sat on the floor of a living room in a brownstone in Atlanta, Georgia, doing the most ridiculous thing he had done in his adult life. He was losing a staring contest to his 6-month-old son. The baby, whose name was not Gerald, and would never be Gerald, and was in fact J1. A choice that had taken 4 days and 2 time zone crossing phone calls with Maya's mother to finalize. Sat on a play mat surrounded by a quantity of soft toys that suggested Maya's mother had been, as predicted, completely unrestrainable in a children's store. He had Min-hyuk's jaw and Maya's eyes and a dimple that appeared when something amused him, which was apparently everything, because J1 found the world extremely funny. He had found his father's attempt at a serious expression particularly funny. From the kitchen, the sound of Maya and her mother having the same argument they had been having for 3 weeks. "Mama, he can make his own coffee, you don't have to." And then her mother's voice, firm and entirely unbothered. "He is too thin, Maya. Look at him. He is too thin and someone needs to feed him." And then Maya's laugh, the real one, the one that started in the chest. The brownstone had been Maya's choice entirely. Min-hyuk had presented her with 4 neighborhoods in Atlanta and asked her to decide. She had taken 2 weeks, visited each one, and come back with a short list of 2. They had walked the streets together on a Saturday morning, J1 on the way, Maya pointing at corners and storefronts and telling him things. "This is where we'd get groceries. This is the park. This is the coffee place that would ruin you." Until they turned onto a particular block and she stopped and looked at a brownstone with a red door and a small garden out front and did not say anything for a full minute. He bought it that afternoon. She had tried to protest about the price. He had said very quietly, "Maya, I need you to let me do this one thing." She had looked at him for a moment. She had said, "Fine, but I'm picking the furniture." He had said, "Absolutely." She had picked out all the furniture herself, a process that, he privately thought, took longer and was more intense than the entire legal review of his syndicate's finances. The brownstone now looked like Maya, warm, deliberate, full of things that had been chosen for specific reasons rather than accumulated for display. Art on the walls, plants in the windows, a bookshelf with real books, not decorative ones, organized by color but also simultaneously by author, a system he did not fully understand but suspected was highly intentional. It looked nothing like the estate. It looked, with a precision that he thought about more than he admitted, like a home. His operations in Seoul had been handed over to a management board, the final step in a process he had been working on, piece by piece, since the weeks after the market. His legitimate holdings, real estate, hospitality, and a private investment fund he had been quietly building for years, stayed in his name and could be managed from anywhere, because good businesses didn't need to be tied to one city. The part of his life that did need a specific city was the part he had spent these past months carefully taking apart, piece by piece, the way you handle something that could still cause damage if you rush it. He was not entirely done with Seoul. He would go back periodically. There were still things to manage, still ends to tie. But he was done with the version of himself that had lived there alone for 6 months. That version had been real. It had been consequential. It had done damage that still lived in certain silences between him and Maya, silences that didn't come from anger but from the accumulated weight of everything that had happened. The 6 months she'd spent in a cold room and the 6 months he'd spent destroying things out of a grief he now understood was based on a lie. Those silences were part of the architecture of who they were together. He had stopped trying to resolve them and started simply sitting in them, which Maya had told him once was the right thing to do. You don't have to fix every quiet place, she had said. Some of them are just part of the house. She was remarkably wise, though she would be furious if he ever told her that. He told her anyway. This was the morning Min-hyuk had decided to propose, and in every other way it was an ordinary one. Maya was on the back porch with coffee, watching the garden. Jae-won was asleep in the nursery post-breakfast, with the focused intensity of a baby who took sleep very seriously. Outside, early spring was settling over the city. Warmer mornings, green coming back into the trees, the quiet hum of a neighborhood waking up after winter. Min-hyuk stood in the kitchen doorway looking at her through the glass. She had her feet up on the porch railing, the way she always did. She was wearing the oversized gray sweater she had brought from Seoul, which had survived everything and was, at this point, not so much an article of clothing as a document. She had her hands wrapped around her mug. She was looking at the garden with the expression she got when she was thinking about something that wasn't work, the open, private kind of thinking that she did when she felt safe enough to not be managing anything. He went back to the living room. He hadn't told Ryu. He hadn't told Maya's mother either, which was a risk, since her mother wasn't exactly known for staying quiet. But he needed this moment to happen without an audience. He opened the drawer in the side table. He took out the black velvet box. He opened it. The pearl ring looked exactly as it had in a Tokyo jeweler's studio, on a night that felt very far away. Not flashy, not busy, just itself, which was the reason he had chosen it. He went to the back door. He opened it. Maya turned her head. She had heard the door. She looked at him with the mild, warm expression she had developed over the past 6 months. A look that had taken 6 months to arrive, built out of every morning he had shown up and every promise he had kept and every silence he had sat in without trying to make it something it wasn't. He walked to where she was sitting. He crouched down next to her chair. She looked at the box in his hand. She looked at his face. She did not say anything yet. I'm not going to make a speech, he said. You've heard me talk enough. You know what happened, and you know what I'm about to ask. I don't know what you're going to say. I've thought about that every day for 6 months and I still don't know. But I needed you to have this, no matter your answer. A beat. Min-hyuk, she said. I know. I'm serious. I know you are. You're always serious. He looked at her steadily. I know this is not the straightforward version of this question. I know there is a list of things that still need to be rebuilt and I know we are in the middle of building them. I'm not asking because I think it resolves anything. I'm asking because, he paused, not for effect. Because he was looking for the honest word rather than the easy one. Because I brought this ring home from Tokyo, and for 6 months I carried it in my jacket pocket every single day. And the only thing that ever made sense was giving it to the person it was bought for. I want to build a life with you, he said. The real kind. The kind with a garden and bad coffee and your mother telling me I'm too thin. The kind where Jae-won grows up with both of us in the same building. The kind where we argue about things that aren't survival. He looked at her. Say yes when you're ready. Take as long as you need. A beat. Maya looked at him. She looked at the ring. She looked at the garden, and the spring light coming through the trees, and the back door of a brownstone with a red door on a street she had chosen because it felt, when she turned the corner that first time, like a street she had already been looking for. She thought about a rooftop room and a portable heater and a whispered promise in the dark. She thought about a fish market floor, and a man stretching out his hand in front of her, while an entire crowd went silent. She thought about the first morning in the penthouse, when she woke up and knew, with the certainty of someone no longer just trying to survive, that the worst of it was finally behind her. She thought about what it cost to trust someone again. She thought about what it cost not to. She took the ring out of the box. She looked at it in her palm for a moment. Then she held out her hand. He put it on. It fit. Of course it fit. He had spent 3 months before Tokyo memorizing her hands. The way she gestured when she explained something she cared about, the way she held her coffee mug, the particular way her left hand rested against his chest when she fell asleep. He had gone back to that small jewelry shop in Tokyo and stood in the same bright little room and said, "I know exactly what I need. I just need you to make it." Inside, from somewhere down the hall, Jae-won woke up. Not crying. He rarely cried. A trait that Maya said he got from his father and Min-hyuk denied, despite all evidence. Just sound. The particular sounds of a baby waking up, reclaiming the world, announcing his presence to the morning. Maya looked toward the door. Then she looked at Min-hyuk. The ring was on her hand. The coffee was still warm. Around them, the garden was in full bloom, alive again after the winter. "Go get him," she said. Min-hyuk stood. He went inside, down the hall, to the nursery with the soft light and the mobile of little moons that Maya's mother had hung from the ceiling. He looked over the side of the crib. Jae-won looked back at him with the direct, appraising gaze of a person who knows exactly who he is and is fully prepared to be found. Min-hyuk picked him up. Jae-won grabbed the collar of his shirt. "Good morning," Min-hyuk said. Jae-won said something that was not yet a word but had the cadence of one, which was a daily, incremental miracle that Min-hyuk had not expected to find as staggering as he did. He carried his son down the hall, past the bookshelf with its particular system, past the art Maya had chosen, into the kitchen where her mother was already pivoting from the stove to say, "Ah, there he is, there is my baby," and past the back door where Maya had stood up from her chair and was holding out her arms, ring catching the light. He passed Jae-won to her. She pressed her nose to the top of his head. The thing she always did. The thing that, all those months ago in a rooftop room, she had promised herself she would still be doing somewhere warm and safe and real. Here was the room. Here was the warmth. Here was the real. This lie had cost them 6 months. 6 months of cold floors, bare bulbs, and a heater that worked on the third try. 6 months of whispered promises, freelance design work, and a fake name. 6 months of a man tearing himself apart with grief on the other side of the city. You could not get those 6 months back. What you could do was build something in the space they left that was worth what they cost. From the kitchen, her mother started singing. Not a whole song, just the beginning of one, soft and unhurried, the kind of sound that belongs in kitchens in the morning, the kind of sound that means, people are here and they are okay and there is food and the day is starting. Min-hyuk stood in the warm kitchen of a brownstone in Atlanta, Georgia, on an ordinary spring morning, and understood for the first time in his life the specific feeling of having arrived somewhere he had not known he was going toward. He was 34 years old. For 6 years, he had run an empire built on fear, control, and the refusal to need anything he couldn't afford to lose. And here was the thing he had not expected, not the love which he had known about, but the particular quality of the life it had made. Ordinary, specific, warm, a baby who stole his staring contests. A woman who had survived everything his world threw at her and come out the other side without losing a single piece of herself. A mother-in-law who was going to make him eat. He thought, "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He thought, "It is enough." He thought, "It is more than enough." Outside the window, Atlanta was waking up. Full of people living their own ordinary lives, their own small kitchens, their own mornings just like this one. Min-hyuk poured 2 cups of coffee. He brought one to Maya. She took it with her free hand, baby on her hip, and looked at him over the rim the way she always had. Like she was checking that he was still real, still present, still the version of himself she had decided to trust. He looked back. He was, if this story found you at exactly the right moment, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story here is for the person who needs to believe that the right love, even the one that got complicated, even the one that went through fire, can still find its way home.